Let's do a hands-on for the AWS CodeBuild. In this hands-on, we will use the CodeBuild project to run a containerized application using the Docker file and the buildspec.yml file from the GitHub. And we will use the GitHub as the source repository and integrate the CodeBuild with the Amazon ECS. And we will experience the entire flow and prepare a GitHub repository and use the build spec and the Docker file in that repository to automatically build a Docker image and push the image to ECR and deploy the service to ECS. Now first, as preparation, let's create the IAM role. Go to the IAM page and click on the role in the left menu bar. And this time, we're going to create the two types of the role. So the first three, let's create for the role for the CodeBuild and to operate the ECR and ECS. I'm going to choose the AWS service as CodeBuild and clicking on the next. So we will attach the three policy. The first one is EC2 container. And you can find the EC2 container registry power user. I'm going to select this one. And next one is ECS underscore full access. I'm going to select this one. And the final one is I am full access. I'm going to select this one. So clicking on the next, and I'm going to name it with, for example, the CodeBuild ECS role for GitHub. But I have already created this one, so I'm going to cancel this one. And again, clicking on the create role, then I'm going to choose the AWS service and the Elastic container service. And for the use case, select the ECS, the service task, and clicking on the next. And attach the policy with ECS task execution role policy. Select this one, and clicking on the next, and name it with, for example, in my case, ECS task execution role. And again, I have already created this one, so I'm going to cancel this one. And the IAM role preparation is complete. Next, I have the public GitHub repository named with the AWS ECS hands-on. And inside it, there are the Docker file and a buildspec YAML and the task definition JSON file. So in the Docker file, which uses the nginx-based Docker file, and clicking on the task definition.json, and scrolling down, and you can find the execution role ARN, and it's set to the ECS task execution role we just created. And you will need to change the account ID in this ARN to your own. And then going back and click on the build spec YAML. Okay. You also need to change the environment variable for the AWS account, the AWS default region. I'm using the US1 region. And you will also need to ensure the ECS service name matches the service we will create. And scrolling down to so this build spec YAML defines the command for each phase, the pre-build, the build, and the post-build. In the pre-build, it log in the ECR, it constructs the ECR repository and URI using the account ID and region. It then gets the login password from the ECR and logs the Docker client in. And during the build phases, it gets the git commit hash to use the image tag. It builds the Docker image using the Docker file and then pushes the image to the ECR repository. And in the post build, it logs the build is complete. It updates the ECS service the AWS ECS update service using the new task definition and forcing the new deployment. So, okay, let's go back to the AWS console, and we need to create the ECR repository, ECS cluster, and the CodeBuild project. And from the console, open the ECS and ECR for each the new browser. And firstly, we're going to create the ECR, the container registry, and we will create the private repository and click on the create. And we're going to make its name as the my web app, the repo GitHub, and leaves the rest as default, and clicking on the create. Okay, it should be created quickly. So next, let's create the ECS cluster. So go to the ECS console and click on the create cluster. I will name it. It's like, for example, the cluster names, the my cluster, and scroll down. And I'm going to use this time the AWS Fargate, which is a serverless service, and leave the monitoring and other setting as default, and clicking on the create. Okay, the cluster creation is in progress and should be the completion in about a time. So next we're gonna create the task definition. Click on the task definition. So I will name it the web app task, and on the same way, I'm going to choose the AWS Fargate, and scrolling down. And for the image URL, I'm going to choose the dummy URL for my web app container, and image URI for the public ECR.AWS Nginx, the Nginx, the latest. So, and this is just for the initial deployment, and the CodeBuild will update this later. And I'm gonna adding the port mapping for the 80, and leave the test rest as a default, scrolling down and clicking on the create. So next, let's create the ECS service. Go into the my cluster, and under the service tab, clicking on the create. And for the task definition family, select the my web app task we just created. And the for service name, we remove this random value, or you should match the value with the service name, my web app service name. So I'm gonna remove this random value, and scrolling down to the networking, open the networking tab. Okay, I'm going to select the default VPC, and for the public IP address, turn this on. Then we will use this verified deployment, and leave the rest as the default, and clicking on the create. So now that the cluster and the service are created, and go to the CloudBuild page, and from the left side menu, select the build project, and create the new build project. So for the project name, I will use the ECS web app build from the GitHub, and scrolling down to the source, I'm going to select the GitHub as the source provider. And you will need the AWS account to GitHub. In the document, AWS document, they show you how to create the connection between the AWS account and GitHub. And going back to the console, and I'm going to choose this time the AWS ECS hands-on is the GitHub name, so I'm going to choose this one. And scrolling down to the environment, so I'm going to leave them as default, and I'm going to use the default OS runtime, and scroll down to the service role. I'm going to use the existing service role which we've created earlier, and called build ECS role for the GitHub role we created, and scrolling down for the build spec. We're going to use the existing the build spec file, build spec YAML, and the leave logs and artifacts as a default, and click on the create the build project. So after about a minute, the project have been created, and I have started the build, and that will run the build. The build status is now the succeeded, and you check the phase detail. All phases, the pre-build, build, and the post-build are succeeded. So now let's check out the ECS cluster. So click on the ECS cluster and go to the My cluster, and clicking on the My Web Service. And the CodeBuild has triggered the ECS deployment. And if you go to the Task tab and selecting the task, and you can open the public IP address from here, and clicking on, and you can find the welcome to Nginx. So this concludes the hands-on. For cleaning up, go to the ECS service, and the update it to the set number of the task to 0. Click on task, and the stop all, and stop all tasks to the number of tasks to 0. And this stops the task. And once the task is stopped, next, please delete the My Web App service, and delete the service. And after that, please delete the cluster of the ECS. And please delete the repository. And again, please delete the CodeBuild project. Delete from here, action to the delete the project, and finally, and delete the IAM role which we've created, the ECS task execution role, and the CodeBuild ECS role for GitHub. So this concludes the explanation.